The FAO warns that over 60% of the world's most consumed foods face serious supply risk. 14 are already showing the damage, from collapsing fish stocks to spreading crop disease, shrinking farmland, and dying pollinators. We're counting down the 10 most vulnerable, ranked by how fast prices are climbing and how fragile supply chains have become. Starting at number 10, a fish that's lost 70% of its population. In the 10th place, wild Atlantic salmon stands as a warning for marine-sourced foods. Since 1959, the adult population has dropped by nearly 70%, driven by warming seas, shrinking spawning grounds, and disease linked to aquaculture, with marine survival rates falling below 3% and ocean temperatures rising 1.5 degrees Celsius. Feeding efficiency for salmon has declined by 12%, pushing mortality higher. These pressures have translated into a 45% jump in U.S. retail prices for wild-caught salmon between 2022 and 2025. Once a reliable, affordable protein, wild Atlantic salmon now signals how environmental stress can turn a staple into a luxury. Number 9. Cacao faces a narrowing climate window that threatens the future of chocolate itself. The cacao tree only thrives in a slim band within 20 degrees of the equator, and as global temperatures climb, models from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute forecast that suitable growing areas could shrink by 40% in just 2 decades. Even within the remaining zones, yields are expected to drop by a quarter by 2040. This squeeze has already pushed the U.S. Chocolate Consumer Price Index up 28% since 2020. Once a treat for all, chocolate is edging toward luxury status, caught between shrinking tropical habitat and rising global demand. 8th place, almonds have become a case study in how ecological fragility translates into higher grocery costs. Nearly 95% of the world's almonds rely on honeybees for pollination, making the crop deeply vulnerable to pollinator decline. Since 2015, managed honeybee colonies in the United States have suffered an average 30% annual loss, according to EPA and USDA data. This biological dependency has real consequences at the checkout. Between 2022 and 2024, almond prices jumped 36%, far outpacing general food inflation. As pollinator health falters, the cost of securing enough bees for California's vast almond orchards rises, and those expenses are passed directly to consumers. The almond story signals how disruptions in one corner of the ecosystem can ripple outward, making familiar foods less affordable and highlighting the hidden costs of ecological imbalance. Number 7. Wheat sits at the center of the world's food supply, but its stability is now threatened by a fast-evolving disease. The fungal pathogen known as UG99 stem rust has been confirmed in 12 countries across Africa and Asia, including major producers like India, Pakistan, and China. This strain can devastate entire wheat fields within days, and crop models project that without widespread resistance, global wheat yields could drop by 15 to 20% by 2030. Surveillance from CMYT and the FAO underscores the urgency, as this single disease endangers a crop that provides about a fifth of the world's calories. The impact is already visible at the checkout. Between 2020 and 2024, the Bread Consumer Price Index climbed 22%, reflecting not only rising production costs, but the growing risk of harvest failures. While resistance breeding programs are underway, the spread of UG99 highlights how disease-driven shocks can quickly turn affordable staples into sources of volatility for both farmers and families. Number 6. Cavendish bananas face a mounting threat from Fusarium wilt tropical race 4, a soil-borne fungus that has now spread to at least 18 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The Cavendish variety, which accounts for nearly half of global banana exports, is grown in vast monoculture plantations, making it especially vulnerable to this single pathogen. According to the United Nations Environment Program, about 40% of Cavendish acreage is now considered at risk, and containment measures have so far failed to halt the advance of the disease. As TR4 infiltrates new regions, export prices for bananas have surged by 34% between 2023 and 2024, placing strain on both producers and consumers. While some resistant cultivars are under development, the global dependence on a single banana variety exposes the fragility of the supply chain and raises the prospect of further price hikes if the disease continues unchecked. Number 5. Coffee is feeling the squeeze as climate change pushes its growing zones higher up the mountains. The Arabica bean, prized for its flavor, now requires elevations at least 200 meters higher than it did a generation ago, shrinking the band of suitable land across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. World Coffee Research models estimate that by 2030, the world will lose around 2 million hectares of viable coffee farmland. This contraction is already hitting wallets. Global coffee prices surged 35% between 2023 and 2024, with specialty growers seeing profit margins fall below 8%. Unlike crops threatened mainly by disease, coffee's challenge is temperature. As heat stress climbs, yields drop, and farmers face tough choices: move uphill, switch crops, or abandon coffee altogether. The daily ritual of a morning cup is becoming a casualty of shifting climate boundaries, with rising prices serving as the first warning sign. Number 4. Rice sits at the foundation of the world's diet, supplying more calories to humanity than any other crop. Yet its future is tied to the fate of low-lying coastal plains, where rising seas threaten the delicate balance of freshwater and saltwater in paddy fields. According to the latest IPCC and FAO assessments, 12% of global rice acreage could be at risk from saltwater intrusion by 2050. In Vietnam's Mekong Delta, one of the world's rice baskets, yields fell 10% in 2023 as saline water pushed further inland. This creeping salinity is more than a local problem. It's a warning that climate change doesn't just shrink harvests through drought or heat, but also by making water itself unusable. As these pressures mount, the global rice consumer price index has climbed 20% since 2020, outpacing most staple grains. The story of rice reveals how the world's most vital foods are increasingly vulnerable to climate-driven disruptions at the water's edge. Number 3. Canned sardines have become an unlikely bellwether for the fragility of affordable protein. Overfishing has stripped nearly 30% of global sardine biomass since 2000, according to FAO fish stock assessments. At the same time, the economics of keeping sardines on supermarket shelves are growing more precarious. Wholesale prices for canned sardines have jumped 38% since 2021, yet retail profit margins for grocers remain razor-thin, less than 7% on average. This squeeze leaves little room for stores to absorb further cost increases, making sardines especially vulnerable to both supply shocks and market consolidation. As a result, inventories of canned sardines in major U.S. markets dropped by a third between 2020 and 2024, a sign that even processed, shelf-stable proteins are no longer immune to scarcity. The story of canned sardines reveals how both ecological depletion and supply chain economics can converge to make once reliable budget foods harder to find and less affordable. Number 2. Evaporated milk is facing a convergence of pressures that threaten its place as a cheap, reliable pantry staple. Over the past 4 years, the average shelf price has surged by 32%, according to USDA dairy price tracking. At the same time, grocers have slashed their assortment of evaporated milk by 40%, pulling dozens of SKUs from the shelves as profit margins shrank to just 6%, a razor-thin buffer in the world of processed dairy. This contraction is not just about cost, it signals a deeper shift in what consumers find on store shelves. The rapid rise of plant-based alternatives, with an 80% jump in market share since 2020, is accelerating the decline, leaving traditional evaporated milk boxed in by both supply and demand. With these combined forces, rising input costs, dwindling shelf space, and competition from non-dairy options, evaporated milk now stands as one of the most vulnerable shelf-stable proteins in the modern food system, setting the stage for even greater scarcity in the foods that depend on it. And finally, in first place, powdered eggs illustrate how even the foods designed for emergencies are no longer immune to the pressure points of the global food system. Once a staple of disaster relief, school nutrition programs, and long-term pantry kits, powdered eggs have seen their average wholesale price climb 45% between 2020 and 2024, according to the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. This surge is not just a reflection of rising input costs, but also the result of mounting logistical hurdles. Freight costs for shipping powdered eggs jumped 12% from 2022 to 2023, driven by container shortages and higher fuel prices, directly inflating the landed cost for every 25-kilogram carton. Retailers, already operating on slim margins, averaging just 6% for powdered egg SKUs in 2023, have responded by cutting shelf space and delisting nearly 1 in 8 varieties. The vulnerability here is systemic. When a shelf-stable protein with decades of reliability can no longer guarantee affordability or supply, it signals that the food system's safety net is fraying. Powdered eggs, once a fallback for hard times, now stand at the intersection of ecological uncertainty, supply chain fragility, and market consolidation, an urgent warning that even the last resort foods are at risk of slipping out of reach. Across all 14 foods, one pattern is clear: environmental instability now drives what ends up on our shelves. With over 60% of key foods at risk, climate, disease, and biodiversity loss directly shape prices and availability. Food security isn't just economic, it's rooted in ecological resilience.